What's hiding beneath those pristine cruise decks? I'm your host at Eerie Hour, sharing 10 terrifying true cruise horror stories. These survivors thought they booked paradise, but found floating nightmares instead. From mysterious disappearances to deadly cover-ups, could you survive when escape means jumping into shark-infested waters? Don't forget to subscribe for more bone-chilling true stories. My name is Lawson, and I still wake up in cold sweats thinking about that research cruise I took back in 2019. What started as a peaceful 7-day Caribbean voyage for marine biology research turned into the most terrifying experience of my life. Something that still makes me question reality itself. I was 32 years old at the time, working on my doctoral thesis about coral reef ecosystems, and had booked passage on this unique vessel that combined passenger accommodations with research facilities. It seemed perfect for my work, giving me access to pristine diving sites while providing the comfort of a cruise ship. The vessel itself was smaller than typical cruise liners, accommodating only about 200 passengers alongside the research crew. But what I discovered during those 7 days at sea defied every logical explanation I could muster as a scientist. The first few days passed normally. I spent my mornings diving at various Caribbean locations, collecting samples, and documenting coral health. The other passengers were a mix of ecotourists and fellow researchers, all seemingly normal people enjoying the unique experience this hybrid vessel offered. The crew was professional and friendly. The food was excellent, and my cabin on Deck 5 was comfortable enough for the research equipment I had brought along. Everything felt routine until the third night, when I decided to explore the ship's layout more carefully. I had noticed on the deck plans posted throughout the vessel that there were 7 passenger decks. But during my casual wandering, I discovered something that made me stop dead in my tracks on what should have been the upper level. Walking along what the signs indicated was Deck 7, I found myself standing before a corridor that extended further than the ship's blueprint suggested possible. At the end of this corridor was a door marked with a room number that didn't match the ship's numbering system. Room 777, which should not have existed according to every deck plan I had studied. My scientific curiosity overrode my caution, and I approached the door, finding it unlocked when I turned the handle. Inside was a spacious suite decorated in an outdated style that seemed decades older than the rest of the ship's modern interior. The furniture was ornate and Victorian. The wallpaper had a pattern of deep red roses against a gold backdrop, and the lighting came from actual oil lamps rather than the ship's electrical system. But what truly unsettled me were the 3 people sitting in the room's living area, casually sipping tea, acting as if this strange setup was completely normal. The woman introduced herself as Malia, appearing to be in her 50s, with graying hair and wearing a dress that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. Beside her sat 2 men, one calling himself Solomon, who seemed to be in his 60s, and another named Chance, who appeared younger, maybe 40. But all of them had this strange quality to their appearance, like they were slightly out of focus, as if I wasn't looking at real people but faded photos. Malia invited me to join them for tea, saying they were regular passengers on this route and had been visiting room 777 for years. She talked about old cruise routes as if they still existed. She described Caribbean destinations the way they were decades ago. When I asked about their cabins or their tickets, they shared odd looks, and Solomon chuckled, saying room 777 was their special home that the ship offered to its most loyal guests. I accepted their tea, trying to act calm while my mind spun in circles. They told story after story about cruises from past decades. Malia mentioned a hurricane from 1987. Chance talked about Jamaica in 1992. Solomon explained how the ship's entertainment had changed from small stage shows to modern productions. Their stories were detailed and consistent, but anytime I mentioned something modern or asked about their real lives, they dodged the question and went back to talking about ships and old trips. After an hour, I excused myself and went straight to my cabin, grabbing the ship's deck plans. There was no sign of room 777 anywhere. The next morning, I went back to Deck 7, determined to find that impossible corridor again and get proof. But no matter many times I walked the deck, the hallway wasn't there. Every door matched the official layout. Every corridor stopped where it should. I started wondering if I had dreamed the whole encounter, but I remembered the taste of the tea, the musty smell of the room, the warm glow of the lamps.
That night, I asked other passengers if they had seen anything odd about the ship's layout. Most of them looked at me like I was confused, but one elderly couple said they thought they got lost their first night and ended up in a part of the ship that didn't look like the rest. They couldn't describe it, but their discomfort was obvious. On the fifth night, I decided to search the ship deck by deck. I brought a flashlight and my phone to take pictures of anything strange. When I reached deck 7 around midnight, that impossible hallway appeared again, stretching into shadows that seemed darker than the ship's actual lights should allow. Room 777's door was slightly open this time, and I could hear soft voices from inside. When I entered, Malia, Solomon, and Chance were sitting exactly where I had seen them before. Same clothes, same teacups, same calm expressions, as if they hadn't moved since my last visit. When I mentioned not finding the room earlier, Malia smiled and said room 777 shows up only at certain times when the ship is aligned. I stayed longer this time, asking deeper questions. Chance said he found the room in 1994 when he was grieving his wife's death. The room comforted him, so he returned every cruise since. Solomon said he discovered it after retiring in the late 80s, when he felt empty. Malia found the room in the early 2000s after her divorce. They all called the room a peaceful refuge where time felt slower and easier. But as they talked, I started noticing unsettling details. They didn't look old enough for the timelines they described. Chance should have been over 70, yet he looked like he was in his 40s. Solomon should have been pushing 90, yet he moved like a man in his 60s. Malia's story didn't match her age either, and when I pointed this out, they looked uncomfortable. Solomon cleared his throat and said maybe the room's peace kept them preserved somehow, but the answer felt too neat, too rehearsed. The longer I stayed, the stranger things felt. They sometimes repeated conversations word for word. Their stories shifted slightly each time they told them. They sometimes faded at the edges when I looked away, as if their bodies were struggling to stay solid. And when I tried taking photographs, the room showed up perfectly, but the 3 people didn't appear at all. When I recorded audio, I could only hear myself. No voices answered my questions, even while I saw their lips moving. By morning, I didn't know what to think. I felt trapped between believing I was hallucinating or accepting something deeply unnatural. The last day of the cruise, I convinced a fellow researcher named Keon to come with me to see the room. I didn't tell him what I had seen. I just said I found a strange part of the ship. When we reached deck 7, the corridor was visible to him as well, and we walked right up to room 777. But when we stepped inside, he saw only furniture. No people, no tea, no signs of life. He walked straight through the spot where Solomon was sitting and didn't react. I felt my stomach twist as I watched the 3 figures smile at me while Keon stared around the room like it was nothing but storage. When we left, he told me I looked exhausted and probably needed rest. I couldn't argue, but I knew what I saw. That evening, as we prepared to disembark in Miami, I went to room 7771 last time. They were still there, unchanged, sipping tea calmly as if time meant nothing. When I said I was leaving, Malia looked sad but unsurprised, saying most people who find the room only stay briefly. Only a few remain forever. She said if I ever felt lost again, the room would always be there on future cruises. 6 months later, when I was doing research for my thesis, I found maritime records that chilled me completely. Passenger lists from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s listed the same names: Malia, Solomon, and Chance. But all 3 were reported missing at sea during their cruises. All were listed as presumed drowned after late-night disappearances. None of their bodies were ever found. Their cabins were left exactly as if they had stepped out for a moment and never returned. That's when I realized room 777 wasn't a peaceful hideaway. It was a trap that caught people who felt lost, lonely, or disconnected. A room sitting between the living world and whatever comes after, pulling in those who wandered too close. I never took another cruise after that. And sometimes I think about how many other ships might have hidden rooms like that, secret places where people slip out of time without knowing. What scares me most is how comforting that Victorian parlor felt, how warm the tea tasted, how safe their smiles looked. And I know that if I ever felt truly alone again, a part of me would be drawn back to room 777, where three friends wait eternally for their next visitor to join their endless tea party. Story 02. Here is your rewritten version. Same start, same end, same length. Kept extremely close. Simple wording, added horror curiosity tone, no headings, only paragraphs, no shortening. My name is Dakota, and what I'm about to tell you happened during my first contract working in food service aboard a massive cruise ship in the summer of 2021. I was 24 years old at the time, fresh out of culinary school, excited for adventure, and hoping to build real experience in the hospitality world. When I signed up for what I thought would be an exciting 6-month contract, working the Mediterranean route on one of those huge floating cities that carry over 4,000 passengers, I pictured myself traveling to beautiful ports, learning from skilled chefs, and getting paid to see countries I had only dreamed about. But what I ended up discovering during those midnight shifts in the ship's enormous kitchen complex twisted my dream into a nightmare that still follows me. Something so disturbing that I haven't been able to work in food service ever since. The ship was one of those modern engineering giants stretching over 1,100 feet long with endless dining rooms, buffets, fancy restaurants, and non-stop room service open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The kitchen areas were huge and designed with industrial tools, giant prep zones, walk-in freezers, coolers, and complicated systems that kept thousands of people fed every single day. My assigned post was in the late-night prep area, meaning I worked the graveyard shift from midnight to 8 in the morning, preparing ingredients and filling supplies for breakfast and early lunch. The work was exhausting but seemed simple at first, cutting vegetables, portioning meat, checking inventory, and following strict maritime safety rules exactly as they were written. Those first few weeks felt normal, even though the schedule was heavy and the pace nonstop. My supervisor, Fletcher, was a longtime cruise ship chef with 15 years of experience. He seemed to know every corner and secret of the operation. He was tough but fair, pushing us to keep the high standards passengers expected, while teaching us the methods that made the nightly routine run smoothly. The rest of the night crew was a mix of veterans and newcomers like me, people from all over the world working these contracts for better money and international experience. But about a month into my contract, small strange things began happening during the night shift, things that didn't match normal food service procedures I had studied. Fletcher would disappear for long stretches in the middle of our shift, leaving the kitchen in the hands of his assistant, Camden, a jumpy man who always looked nervous when Fletcher was gone. During these disappearances, certain senior workers would show up at the service elevators with large insulated containers and wheeled carts, moving quickly and quietly through the kitchen in a way that didn't match regular food prep or waste routines. If I asked Camden about these deliveries, he would get tense and change the subject, or send me to another part of the kitchen where I couldn't see what was going on. My curiosity only grew when I realized some walk-in coolers and storage areas, places that should have been accessible to every kitchen worker, were locked during the night shift. Only Fletcher and a few older staff members had the keys. These rooms were supposedly for high-value ingredients like seafood and fancy cuts of meat, but the security felt excessive. And even stranger, people who weren't food service workers at all, housekeeping, passenger services, even security, would come by these locked doors during the night. None of it made sense. The longer I watched, the clearer it became that something was off. Fletcher's sudden disappearances, Camden's panic whenever I noticed anything unusual, and the strange traffic near the locked storage rooms all hinted towards something much darker. Then during my 6th week on board, everything changed. I was organizing one of the prep zones near the restricted storage rooms while Fletcher was off on one of his usual absences. That's when I heard voices and movement coming from behind one of the locked doors. My curiosity finally won. I carefully moved into a position where I could look through the small window on the door without being seen. What I saw on the other side made my stomach twist. Fletcher was inside along with 3 crew members I didn't recognize. But they weren't handling food at all. They were sorting through piles of personal belongings, things that clearly belonged to passengers. Jewelry, watches, cameras, passports, cash, electronics, all carefully arranged in piles. They placed the most valuable items into special containers labeled with port codes I recognized from our route. My entire body went cold as I watched Fletcher pick up an expensive watch, examine it, and then drop it into a container clearly marked for a port we'd be visiting in a few days. As I kept watching, the truth hit me hard. This was not small-time stealing. This was a planned smuggling operation using the ship's food service zones as cover. These crew members were stealing from passengers and moving the stolen valuables off the ship during port stops, sending them to people waiting on shore. It must have been running for months, maybe years, involving workers from multiple departments, people with access to rooms, hallways, and areas passengers never thought twice about. The worst part was remembering the passengers who had complained in the dining halls and lounges about missing items, only to be told by crew that they probably misplaced them or left them somewhere earlier in the trip. Now I knew exactly why those complaints went nowhere. The thieves were the ones calming them down, pretending to help while hiding their crimes. These people were in positions of trust, and they were using that trust to commit crimes right under everyone's noses. And now I knew about it. I was nobody, just a young worker with no power, surrounded by people who clearly didn't mind stealing from thousands of unsuspecting travelers. If they figured out what I had seen, I knew they wouldn't hesitate to get rid of me. There was no safe way off the ship, no easy way to contact outside help. Every night after that, I acted normal while secretly writing down every detail I could. Who was involved, what times they worked, what they moved, what containers they used. The risk was huge, but I felt I had to gather proof. Fletcher and the others were smart, experienced, always watching. I had to hide my fear and pretend I knew nothing. But things grew even more threatening when I noticed how passengers who complained too much suddenly stopped complaining. Some had accidents on board. Some got sick unexpectedly. I overheard crew whispering about passengers who had fallen or been found unconscious after causing trouble about missing items. Part of me wanted to believe these were coincidences, but deep down I knew better. The idea that these criminals might actually hurt passengers to protect their operation terrified me. Everything reached a breaking point during my 10th week when Fletcher approached me. He cornered me near the prep stations, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. He said he wanted me to help with special inventory tasks and earn easy extra money. But the tone in his voice made it clear this wasn't a choice. They wanted me involved. They needed me to become one of them so they wouldn't have to worry about me. And if I said no, I had no doubt they would make me disappear, just like the missing passengers they silenced. I pretended to agree, acting interested while planning how to escape. I knew I had to get off the ship at the next port stop or risk being trapped forever, forced into crimes or worse. Leaving early would be dangerous. If Fletcher suspected I planned to report them, I would never make it off alive. I needed a believable reason to leave that wouldn't trigger suspicion. When we reached Barcelona in week 11, I made my move. I told the ship's management I had a family emergency and needed to leave immediately. I gathered my evidence, every note, every detail, and kept it hidden in my personal bag. Somehow my request was approved before Fletcher noticed anything strange. I walked off that ship with only my belongings and the proof of what I had seen. I didn't even look back because I was scared Fletcher or his crew might appear behind me. Once I reached land, I contacted the Spanish maritime police and the international agencies that handle crimes on cruise ships. I gave them everything. My information helped lead to arrests, including Fletcher. Investigators discovered the smuggling network had been operating for years across multiple ships, stealing millions of dollars worth of items from passengers. My testimony helped break the case open, but it also made me a target. People involved in these networks don't forget who exposed them. I knew I could never go back to the maritime industry again, or even feel safe working around strangers in food service environments. Today, more than 3 years later, I still deal with the trauma of those months at sea. I still think about all the passengers who trusted the smiling staff, delivering their meals and cleaning their rooms, unaware of the criminals hiding among the crew. It taught me that even in places that feel safe and carefully controlled, something dangerous can be hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to take advantage of anyone who isn't paying attention. I never returned to food service work, and I've spent years in therapy trying to heal from the fear of being trapped on that ship with nowhere to run, no one to trust, and no safe way to get help until the day I finally stepped onto land and exposed everything I knew. Story 03. My name is Bennett, and what I'm about to tell you happened during what should have been a peaceful family bonding cruise to Alaska. In September 2018, I was 45 years old at the time, recently divorced and desperately trying to reconnect with my two teenagers who had been living with their mother for the past year. My son Case was 16 and going through that typical rebellious phase where he barely spoke to me, while my daughter Iris was 14 and still dealing with the emotional fallout from our family falling apart. I thought a 10-day Alaska cruise on a smaller expedition vessel would be perfect for us, giving us quiet moments, beautiful sights, and enough shared experiences to help rebuild what had been broken. But what we faced during those 10 days in the cold northern waters twisted our healing trip into something dark, frightening, and unforgettable. An experience that still grips all three of us and has left behind scars that even years of therapy haven't fully healed. The vessel we booked was one of those cozy expedition ships for only about 200 passengers, built to move through rugged Alaska waters and slip into remote areas larger ships couldn't reach. It had all the high-tech safety tools you expect, but also that wild, adventurous atmosphere that attracts people looking for a real experience rather than flashy entertainment on huge cruise liners. Our cabin was small but comfortable. The kids had twin beds, and I slept on a fold-out sofa. And for the first few days, it felt like maybe this trip could truly help us. Case actually began showing interest in wildlife photography, and Iris loved the glacier presentations given by the naturalists aboard the ship. Those early days felt almost magical. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, calm seas, and endless views of snow-capped peaks rising sharp and bright above the water. We saw humpback whales, orcas, sea otters, and flocks of seabirds drifting through untouched wilderness that looked like it hadn't changed in thousands of years. For the first time since the divorce, the kids were opening up to me, talking, smiling, letting their walls down. I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, this could be the turning point we all needed. But on the fourth day, as we moved deeper into the remote parts of Southeast Alaska, something started happening. Something that made no logical sense and pushed us into an experience that felt unnatural in every possible way. I'd spent my entire career working in meteorology, so I was used to strange weather, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw that morning. When I stepped onto our small balcony with a cup of coffee, I looked up and noticed a single perfectly round storm cloud hovering directly over the ship, maybe 2,000 feet above. It was dark, swirling, and filled with non-stop internal lightning that flickered like something alive. What made it terrifying was that the sky everywhere else was perfectly clear, empty, bright. It was as if this storm existed only above us, like it had chosen us. My training told me this formation was impossible, but there it was, following our ship like some kind of dark, watching presence that didn't care about the normal laws of nature. As the morning went on and we sailed deeper through the inside passage, the storm cloud didn't drift or fade like it should have. No matter which direction the captain steered or how fast the ship moved, the cloud stayed centered above us with unnatural precision, almost like it was tethered to us. The captain made a few announcements, trying to downplay the situation and tell passengers everything was fine, but I could hear the nervousness in his voice. Nothing he said matched anything I knew about weather. By early afternoon, the cloud began releasing bursts of rain and hail, but only over our ship. I could literally watch the rain boundary end just a few feet outside the railings, while other ships in the distance sailed smoothly under clear skies. On the fifth day, things went from strange to terrifying. The storm started unleashing violent winds that slammed against our ship so hard the hallway shook. Passengers staggered like drunk people, just trying to walk. Most of them ended up staying in their cabins, seasick and scared. But what scared me more than the weather was how the storm acted. Storms move with pressure systems and wind. This one didn't. It hovered, waited, reacted. It felt aware. It felt like it was watching us. When I checked the ship's weather instruments, I saw that other ships nearby were reporting stable, calm conditions, completely different from what we were trapped in. On the 6th day, the storm grew so powerful that the captain had no choice but to change our itinerary. He canceled stops, turned into sheltered areas, and tried to escape the system. But it didn't matter where we went. The storm stayed with us, hitting us harder every hour. Waves began forming that had no business existing in sheltered waters. They slammed against us with unnatural strength, and lightning struck so often that the crew began worrying about our equipment failing. People on board felt the pressure too. Fear spread like a sickness. Passengers kept reporting the same kinds of nightmares. People drowning, shadows in the water, whispers calling their names from the storm. Some said they heard voices in languages they couldn't understand. My kids weren't spared. Case grew silent and distant, while Iris had panic attacks that sent us to the medical center more than once. And slowly I started feeling something I couldn't explain. A growing certainty that this wasn't just weather. This storm felt aware of us, like it was feeding off us. On the 7th day, when the storm was roaring with impossible strength, our radio started picking up strange transmissions. They came through on emergency frequencies in languages no one recognized, not even the crew who spoke multiple languages. These transmissions always happened during the worst parts of the storm. They felt like warnings or desperate cries, like something was trying to reach us from somewhere else. And each time the signal seemed to come from the heart of the storm right above us. Even the captain looked shaken, but there was nothing he could do. On the 8th night, the storm reached a level that pushed the ship to its limits. Winds stronger than hurricanes crushed against our vessel, tossing it around like it weighed nothing. Waves rose like walls around us, slamming into us with force that made metal groan. Lightning burst nonstop, filling the ship with flickers of white and blue. People were hurt. Furniture ripped loose despite being bolted down. The ship felt like it was moments away from breaking apart. And worst of all, we had no communication with the outside world. The storm had swallowed our signals. We were trapped, cut off, and completely alone. That night, as I held my kids close and tried to keep them calm, I noticed something horrifying, something that made everything click into place. The storm reacted to us. When fear peaked among passengers, the storm grew stronger, louder, more violent. When there were brief moments of hope or calm, the storm eased slightly. It was as if the storm wasn't just surrounding us, it was feeding on us. Our fear was fueling it. On the 9th day, after nearly a week of torment, the captain made a desperate decision. Instead of running, he would steer directly into the storm center. He believed that if this thing was unnatural, then facing the center might be the only way out. It was a terrifying choice, but we didn't have many options left. Supplies were running low, people were injured, and the ship couldn't take much more. As we entered the storm's eye, everything changed. The center wasn't calm like normal storms. Instead, it was filled with swirling fog and strange lights that created illusions of impossible depths, stretching far above and below us. The strange radio transmissions grew louder and clearer, and for the first time, they sounded like desperate messages from other ships. Ships that had vanished in Alaska over the years. Crews lost with no explanation. It felt like we were drifting through a place trapped between realities. A place where lost vessels called out endlessly, hoping someone could hear them. And then, Without warning, everything stopped. After what felt like hours inside that supernatural center, we suddenly broke through into calm waters beneath a perfectly clear sky. The storm was gone, not fading, gone completely, as if it had never existed. And when we checked our coordinates, we discovered we were exactly where we should have been on our original path, as though the entire nightmare happened outside normal time. The psychological fallout has never really faded. My children needed years of therapy. Case developed a fear of water so severe he refuses to go near lakes or pools. And Iris still suffers from anxiety and nightmares that return whenever major storms pass through our area. As for me, I left meteorology altogether. After what we lived through, I couldn't trust the science I had built my life around. Months later, I learned we were not the first. Dozens of hidden maritime records, strange reports ignored or dismissed, describe similar events in the same region. Localized storms that trapped ships, tormented their passengers, and seemed to grow stronger from fear. Most were brushed off as exaggerations or stress responses. None were taken seriously. None were investigated deeply. Today, more than 5 years after our terrifying Alaska cruise, my family still struggles with the lasting effects of what we experienced during those 10 days. We have never taken another vacation that involves traveling over water, and we maintain emergency supplies and communication equipment in our home because we learned firsthand how quickly normal life can be disrupted by forces beyond human understanding or control. The experience taught us that there are aspects of our world that science cannot explain or predict, and that sometimes the most dangerous threats are those that exist just beyond the boundaries of what we consider possible. I still wake up sometimes hearing those mysterious radio transmissions and wondering about the other families who may have encountered that storm system and never made it back to tell their story. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more chilling tales from the sea, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll never miss the next voyage into the unknown. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.